The topic for today's video: if you could only have one reverb plugin, what would it be and why? For me, it's the Goodhertz Megaverb 3. There are so many factors and variables when it comes to selecting a reverb that I'm guessing we're going to have a really wide array of responses. So make sure you explain in the comments the type of music you make and then why you're so drawn to that reverb. People are very defensive when it comes to reverbs and what sounds good and what doesn't. You know, with me, if you can get the results, it really doesn't matter what the processor is that you use. But with reverb, that's a little bit different. For example, a lot of people, especially if you work with, real instruments, real tracking, not all electronic synthesized music, having something like altiverb or a convolution reverb is very important. That can simulate a real space, so you can take all of those really raw, dry recordings and put everybody into one space. That's not that important to me. In fact, that's just not the style of music that I do. I don't mix that style of music. So for me, that's just not that important. Likewise, some people love to have really deep dive controls, and they love the fact that they can go between 80 different algorithms, like going from 4 or 5 different halls, 4 or 5 different plates, rooms, chambers, some of the classics that you're used to seeing on like algorithmic reverbs and also convolution reverbs as well. Again, for me, that's nice, but I don't want to be bogged down in a huge feature set. But as we go through the DAW, we'll look at a few different reverbs that I do use, and I think we'll get a chance to talk about how variables and these different conditions weigh into the decision-making process. So without further ado, let's get into the video. Like we always do in this series, we'll go on a bit of a journey and talk about some of the other reverbs that I use and their functions before we get to our end destination and talk about why in this case, the Megaverb 3 could be my one and only reverb if it had to be. Anyway, let's start with this signal. Super pretty sound, and if I want to go and make something pretty get even prettier, I will go with a plate reverb. And here we have two that I use regularly, the Tall Reverb 4 and the UAD Pure Plate. This one just tends to be a little bit darker by default, so sometimes that's what you want. This one can be a little bit brighter, a little bit more obvious, if you will, when you bring it on. So this is it in its default position. So you can hear the tail there. We're only at 20% wet, so let's go in here and fine tune this. And you're going to hear how smooth and clean and clear this is. Let's bring the dry all the way out, the wet all the way up, and we're just going to tweak it a little bit. Luckily, we only have like 8 or so parameters, so setting this up should be very streamlined and efficient. And let's go ahead and make it actually very large, which I wouldn't normally do, but just for the sake of it. So I like that. One thing that you always wish you had on all reverbs is the ability to sync your pre-delay to the tempo that you're working at. There are pre-delay calculators and stuff that you can use if you want to, but in this case, we just kind of have to use our ears and listen. So I'm going to set this balance up pretty strong so we can hear mostly reverb. Yeah, so I can hear when it's coming in. This is how I tend to work with pre-delay, and then I'll find my balance, of course. Probably a little bit too much. Okay, that should be good for me. And now we'll go ahead and we're going to set this up. So we'll bring our dry all the way back and then start to feed in some wet. And it's beautiful. So it works great on things like electric keys, electric bass, electric guitar, vocals sometimes. It's a plate reverb. It's what you expect. But just out of the box, this one sounds really good. It's simple, and it does what it's supposed to do. It's free as well, so that's always a benefit. The other plate that I'll use a lot because it gives me a slightly different tone, a little more dense in the low end, low mids, is this UAD Pure Plate. Very simple again to set up. It sounds really good. There's some things I like about it, some things I dislike about it in terms of the interface. I love this wet solo by default. This is turned on, so we're just hearing the reverb signal and then we want to mix it in, we turn that off. The only thing I don't like about it is that you set the reverb time with this thing. Why not just give us a very basic slider, but whatever. So let's actually just start by setting a reverb time to, we'll do something big. We'll do like 3 seconds or so. Well, let's go 4 seconds so you can really hear it. And then we're gonna do exactly what we did with the Tall 4. We can set this up really quickly. You can hear how much darker this is. Low cut to 90. We'll add a little bit of that pre-delay again. And again, I'd have to actually bring this back to a balance to figure it out. So now we'll turn wet solo off, and now we are gonna get our balance. One thing to be aware of with this is apparently, and I don't know if this is 100% true, but if you notice, when I get to 50%, I'm all the way up here. And I'm not sure if that's actually true or not, but I have noticed that before, that you have to set this value really, really high. Okay. So another just beautiful reverb sound, plate reverb that you can dial in minutes compared to other stuff that's out there where there's so many different options and parameters and things to click on. I've considered, I think it's from Waves, there's a like Abbey Roads plates, and that has like 4 different plate settings, and I think it's pretty easy to work with. I haven't demoed it, I haven't tried it, but that one's been interesting to me just to have a few more timbre options that I could jump between really quickly. We're looking at another free reverb here, Oral River, which I use in really one specific way, which is to just work with the early reflections. That being said, this is a great reverb to supplement what you have built into your DAW because they really do have a lot of like presets for pretty much any situation. So we have this guitar here. And honestly, that's a pretty good starting point if we did want to try to put this guitar into a smaller type room. Now, the way I work with it is I really just focus in on the early reflections. So I don't really use the reverb engine at all. I just use the early reflections. And let's go ahead and just reset what we've got going on with these EQs. One thing to be aware of if you're wondering, like, oh my gosh, my signal does not sound bright enough. I think by default, what happens is it comes in as like a low pass filter here, and now this is determining where you're setting that frequency cutoff. So just be aware of that. You can do the same thing with the low end too. So if you want to start from kind of like more of a true scratch position, this is the way that you would do it. So now let's just go ahead and try out some of these early reflections. Number 6 sounds very flattering. You can sculpt it with the EQ, but I don't think I'm going to do that. And now we're just going to bring in a balance. So you can hear what that does to the signal. It's a great little trick, especially when you have a very dense mix already and you can't afford to have any more like reverb tails taking up space. Adding in a little bit of early reflections like this, great way to do it. And again, you can shape it further with the EQ. All right, we're down to our final 2 reverbs, and we're looking here at the Arts Acoustic Reverb. I use this one whenever I'm in the situation where I'm willing to do more tweaking to the reverb sound. It's actually probably way more flexible and capable of a lot more reverb tones and timbres than the other reverb we're going to look at, but I just find that I work faster with the final one, with the Megaverb. But this one's great too. So the way I work with this one is I always will start with a preset, and then I'll kind of flip through a couple and tweak until I get what I like. So The first thing I'll do is I'm just going to set this up like this because I know this is how I kind of want to listen to it. When I load in a preset, it will ignore the dry wet level. It will ignore the bit depth. That's something you can set up. So we go into our presets here, and you're going to see that there are tons of options. So there's input defined, so that's going to be based on the source, and we have a vocal, so that's what we'll use. But we also have room defined too, so this is what you're more used to working with. So if you want an ambience or a chamber or room, you kind of know the expectation for how that reverb's going to sound. But in our case, we'll go input defined, we're going to go vocals, and right away we have female vocal generic 1 through 7, so let's just listen.
Cut the cord that kept us connected, blacking out the mirror where your light once reflected. Cut the cord that kept us connected, blacking out the mirror where your light once reflected. Cut the cord that kept us connected, blacking out the mirror where your light once reflected.
And I'm going to use this first generic one because this is a good example of where I'd be able to kind of tweak it into where I want it to be. So I'm just going to go ahead and set the quality to ultra.
Cut the cord that kept us connected, blacking out the mirror where your light once reflected. Cut the cord that kept us connected, blacking out the mirror where your light once reflected. Cut the cord that kept us connected, blacking out the mirror where your light once reflected. Cut the cord that kept us connected, blacking out the mirror where your light once reflected. Cut the cord that kept us connected, blacking out the mirror where your light once reflected.
And yeah, I'd be very happy with that as my reverb sound for this vocal. The issue I have with this one, and it's not an issue that's bad, it's just a personal thing, is that my instinct is telling me to sit here and mess around with all of these parameters for a long amount of time, which in the heat of the moment when you're working on music is something that can really work against you. And that's the reason why this wouldn't be my one and only, but I really do love this reverb. Everything about it is so cool. If you work with it from scratch, you can notice that your reverb types are not things that you're maybe used to. So it doesn't give you your classic plate, hall, chamber. And I like that. I like that about this one because it lets you use your ear a little bit more and doesn't force you to, conform to expectations. That being said, when I work with it, I do conform to expectations. So let's say we had a plate here. Let's go medium plate.
Cut the cord that kept us connected, blacking out the mirror where your light once reflected.
This is also going to sound really good, I think.
Cut the cord that kept us connected, blacking out the mirror where your light once reflected. Cut the cord that kept us connected, blacking out the mirror where your light once reflected. Cut the cord that kept us connected, blacking out the mirror where your light.
And that also sounds fantastic. So it's a reverb that sounds great, that if you're willing to just kind of tweak certain parameters and just accept what you get and move on, I think it would be good for me. My issue is my inability to accept it and move on. So we're going to go ahead now and look at our final reverb and talk about the reason why this would be my selection. And now to our final reverb, this would be my one and only, and I could give up everything else. And the reason is, within about 2 minutes from scratch, I can dial in the reverb sound that I want. It sounds good. It has every feature that I could ever really want in a reverb and nothing that I don't. And so for me, this would be the one I would keep. For other people, they're not going to like the limited functionality, but I personally hate sitting there and tweaking an effect for like 25, 30 minutes only to come back the next day and be like, ooh, I actually don't like this. So this one forces me to work within about 2 minutes, and it can always deliver a great sound. So our first example will be on the bus, and then we'll go through on some of these individual instruments just so we can hear some of these different modes and things.
Cut the cord that kept us connected, blacking out the mirror where your light was reflected. All in the love from up above, we used to feel like a glove. cord that kept us connected, blacking out the mirror where your light was reflected. All of the love from up above, we used to feel like a glove. Cut the cord that kept us connected, blacking out the mirror where your light once reflected. All of the love from up above, we used to feel like a glove. Cut the cord that kept us connected, blacking out the mirror where your light once reflected. All of the love from up above, we used to feel like a glove.
So that would be an example of me setting a master reverb, and I think it sounds really good.
Cut the cord that kept us connected, blacking out the mirror where your light once reflected. All of the love from up above, we used to feel like a glove.
Okay, so there's our first example. Next, we'll just go ahead and do one specifically for the vocal. So with each of these individual parts, I would literally just follow the exact same steps. I'm going to try to dial in a sound that I like and then kind of fine tune it and then listen to the different modes, make a selection, call it a day. So we'll do this on the vocal and maybe on, I don't know, maybe we'll do it on the drums too so we can show how like the ducking works or how the gating works.
Cut the cord that kept us connected, blacking out the mirror where your light once reflected. All of the love from up above.
Alrighty, so after just a couple minutes of tweaking, here are the settings that we selected. We'll go ahead and put this all the way up to 100 just so we can really hear what the reverb is doing.
Cut the cord that kept us connected, blacking out the mirror where your light once reflected. All of the love from up above.
There you go. So that's what we would do maybe for the vocals, and let's do an example with the drums as well. Alrighty, and here we have our settings for the drums. You can see that we've enabled the ducking mode, and this ducking mode is literally just trying to allow the transients to come through without having that reverb attached to them. So here's what we have. It's a little bit heavy-handed. And let's hear it in context.
From up above, we used to feel like a glove.
So if you're listening in headphones or you have really good quality speakers, well, probably not even great quality speakers, you will hear the drums kind of open up and feel like they're filling up a lot more space in that stereo field. We can listen to what it sounds like if I was on 100%.
Cut the cord.
And yeah, I think that's fine for what we'd want with the drums. Okay, and here we've done an example where we've made a gigantic reverb for our pluck.
Blacking out the mirror where your light once reflected. All of the love from up above, we used to feel like a glove. Cut the cord that kept us connected, blacking out the mirror where your light once reflected.
So there you go. That is a look at the Goodhertz Megaverb and would be the one and only reverb that I would keep if I absolutely had to make that choice. And that's going to do it for our one and only reverb video. Depending on your workflow and the style of music you make, you might have a totally different answer to this. Like I said before, if you need to get real spaces, something like altiverb, some kind of a convolution reverb will be your best friend and your go-to bet. For some people, the Valhalla stuff is essential because there's just so many settings and you can really kind of fine tune in what you want. For me and for my workflow and the style of music that I make, I don't need anything super complex. I just want something that sounds good with some variety, that has built-in ducking, that has a built-in gate. Things like that is what it's all about for me. So that's the reason why the Megaverb would be my selection, but I'm guessing that down in the comments, we're going to see a wide range of things. And definitely explain your reasoning why. I think that's the most important. So thank you so much for watching. I hope everyone has a wonderful day. And until the next video, take care.